In this video, I would like to comment a quote by Hegel. Every individual is a child of his time, so philosophy too is its own time apprehended in thoughts. And I would like to give my perspective, whoever is the I who speaks when I say I, about the 21st century. And I made a broad structure that you can see in the description in 10 points. First point, I will talk about philosophy briefly. Second point, the two major features of our times, in my view. Third point, I will briefly talk about geopolitics. Fourth point, economics. Fifth point, religion. Sixth point, ecology. The seventh point, technology. The eighth point, I will briefly talk about the West. The ninth point, about what I call spirit or spirituality. And the 10th point, I will talk about science and philosophy. So I will begin by talking about philosophy. There is a recurrent literary feature in the European tradition. It's the idea that an external observer coming from a distant country or another planet, we find this in Montesquieu, a Persian observing 18th century France. We find this in Voltaire, an extraterrestrial being observing life on Earth. We find this in the 17th century writings of Cyrano de Bergerac, the inhabitants of the moon. So it's a recurring feature of Western tradition to see yourself through the eyes of another and to imagine yourself, your civilization, your time, your culture being observed by an other. And it is thought that only through the mediation of the look of an other can you know yourself and know who you are. So this is what I will try to do. I will imagine that I have to describe to an other what our times are, what are the fundamental determinations, characteristics, and features of the early 21st century. And I like to communicate my state of mind or the feelings of my soul by sharing songs. And if you want to have an idea of how I kind of feel at the moment, you can listen to the song, The Logical Song. It kind of describes my inner feelings as of now. So that was about philosophy. So I will try to give my broad perspective of the fundamental features of what is my time, my world, basically. So if I had to express what, in my view, and I know myself that I am empirically determined, I am a singular self, I have particularities, I am a particular self, and I have a universal mind, so I am three in one, as Hegel would say. But my view of the world as of now is determined and biased and prejudiced by my own empirical singular and particular determinations. So I can only see the world and understand the world through the mediation of me being me as an empirical individual and me being a Westerner in my late 20s, male with a European culture. So I am necessarily biased and prejudiced at this moment in time, but I will try to express myself honestly nonetheless. If I had to describe the two fundamental features of our day and age, I would say that first, the internet enables every thinking consciousness with a connection to the internet to share his or her ideas with the whole world. So it creates a worldwide web of consciousness, and it's a revolutionary tool. It's like the printing press but in a much more developed fashion. So for me, the fundamental feature of the 21st century is the rise and development of the internet, which enables the rise of and the emergence of a worldwide consciousness. So if I had to single out one feature of our times, I would say the internet. The second, in my view, most important characteristic of our times is the slow disappearance of the white race. The demographic decline of the white race. For me, it's maybe I speak as a white person, but it's striking because if we look back at the history of the white race, whites have been responsible for the main developments in physics, chemistry, biology, and all of the social sciences. And the modern world has been shaped, for better and for worse, by white minds. The population was broadly 1 billion inhabitants in 1800, two centuries ago. Today it's broadly 7 billions. So the population has been multiplied by 7 in the course of 2 centuries. The standards of living have dramatically increased. Health has been improved dramatically. The life expectancy has been multiplied by 2 or more sometimes all over the world. I know that there have been tremendous inequalities, but overall the standards of living and health and life expectancy and demographics have been transformed mostly by the influence of white medicine, white discoveries in science, the development of economics, sociology, and all the social sciences. So whites have been responsible, for better and for worse, for the discovery of America and bringing forth America into world history, the discovery of Australia, Antarctica, the traveling all around the globe. Whites have been responsible, for better and for worse, for the development of capitalism, democracy, partly socialism. It's partly a Jewish idea, but whites have helped spread the idea of socialism. Liberalism, as the Americans understand the word, namely the idea of equality, tolerance, anti-racism, women's rights, solidarity. So these ideas are partly influenced by Jewish minds, but they have been spread by whites, basically by white imperialism, one would say. So the fundamental feature of the 21st century for me is the disappearance of the white race, which, for better and for worse, has shaped the entire world. The modern world is the byproduct of white minds, with all the inequalities, all the problems, all the catastrophes, all the bad aspects, but also all the good aspects. So yeah, for me, the two fundamental features of our age are the internet and the question of the white race. That's my view. Okay, so now geopolitics in a nutshell. I go to the point. I simplify. I do not go into details. I go directly to the broad picture. The geopolitical features of our time are the decline of the United States of America, which has been the dominant geopolitical power for more than 100 years now, and the decline of Europe, which had been the geopolitical agent of the past 500 years, the demographic decline of Europe, the political decline, the military decline, and most importantly, the moral decline. What is most striking is that Europe has lost self-confidence. Europeans despise themselves and are feeling guilty and ashamed of being who they are, and Europe is morally lost. So that's the fundamental feature, the decline of the US and Europe. Then we have the rise of China, the economic and military rise of China, which apparently is the greatest economic miracle in the whole history of mankind, what has happened in China over the past 30 years or so. There's the rise of India. Russia, of course, which is resentful of having lost the Cold War and having declined from the state of being a superpower when the USSR was confronting the United States as the second most influential geopolitical agent. So the Russians have been declining, and now they want to reclaim an important geopolitical role. South America wants to become more independent from the United States. They want to acquire autonomy because they have been shaped by Northern American influences. So there's this will. There's the tremendous demographic growth of Africa. Africa is not a geopolitical force, but it is a demographic power. So this is one of the fundamental features of modernity, the birth rates in Africa. And finally, there's the awakening, the religious awakening of the Muslim world. And Islam is on the verge of becoming a conquering power again. And the Muslim world is a driving force behind a lot of changes in modernity. So this is what I could say very briefly about geopolitics. Now about economics. I will go to the point. There are tremendous inequalities throughout the world. There's a very strong north-south divide. The north, Europe, the United States, Canada, and also China and Japan are very wealthy in comparison to the south, with the exceptions of countries like Australia, New Zealand, and so on. But the fundamental features of our day and age in terms of economics are tremendous inequalities. A very few number of billionaires own as much wealth as half the population. But if we look at the economic state of the world in absolute terms, the standards of living have never been so high on average for the average person. The average inhabitant of a relatively wealthy country enjoys better standards of living than the kings and queens of ancient times. So there's this ambiguity that there are tremendous inequalities, but at the same time, wealth as never produced before. So the problem from a leftist perspective is the distribution of wealth, not the creation of wealth. So yeah, that's what I could say. Then on the religious question, the Muslim world is thriving demographically and in terms of religious faith. So there's a revival and a rebirth of Islam, which is, despite all the troubles and the catastrophes and the wars that Islam has encountered in the 21st century and even in the 1990s, the Muslim world is developing and thriving from a religious standpoint. Then Christianity is also on the rise demographically in Africa, South America. But I know that Christians are persecuted throughout the world as minorities in the Middle East, for instance. And on the other hand, Christianity in the West, which is the historical, traditional homeland of Christianity, although strictly speaking it gave birth in the Middle East, but then it became a European religion historically. Christianity is declining in the West. There's a loss of faith, church attendances drop, people replace Christianity with various brands of spirituality imported from the East or New Age teachings, but there's a rise of atheism and a loss of faith in the West. Not everywhere, but that's a fundamental feature, that not only is the white race declining demographically, but it is losing its faith, losing its historical religion. So that's a fundamental feature. So yeah. Now, Another point, ecology. One of the fundamental characteristics of our day and age, and if I had to express what the 21st century is about, I would talk about the mass extinctions of biological species brought about by the modern development of human activity, human industry, and economics and technology. The great amount of pollution, which is a byproduct, a consequence of human activity, and the threat, the long-term threat for the very survival of human life. That's one of the key features. Many people are influenced by the will to change the climatic condition to enable the survival and the maintaining of human life in the long term. So it is connected with all other determinations, namely that the internet enables the rise of an ecological consciousness. But yeah, the climate change and the massive threat to non-human and human life on the planet because of human activity are one of the recurring and most important features of our day and age. So yeah. Then about technology, the 21st century is in the continuity of the 20th century, but we are witnessing the development of an increasing amount of complex, highly technical technologies. We have nanotechnology, biotechnologies, the dream of transhumanism to connect man and machine to create a higher man, a higher transhuman state of being. And there are the development of space travels and the ideas of establishing colonies on Mars, and in the longer term to envision, why not, exploring other solar systems and to find life, or to export a human life on other solar systems and other planets. So this is a recurring feature of our day and age, this technological development, this tremendous growth of technology and its influence and its potentialities on the development of human life. And it is both a threat and an opportunity for human life. So this is one of the key features of our day and age. Then I will talk specifically about the West. I mean by the West, white countries without necessarily including Eastern Europe. So the West, I mean everything westward of Poland and United States, Canada, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia. I simplify. So economically, Japan is a Western country, but here I mean white Western countries. If I had to sum up the situation in the West, I would say that the West is haunted by the ghost of Adolf Hitler. Everything in the West revolves around the ghost of Hitler. World War II was such a traumatic event for the Western world, and the peace movement, the leftist movement in the 1960s, and the Cultural Revolution has had such a tremendous influence that nowadays everything revolves around the absence and the presence of the figure of the far-right, white, nationalist male. And the left, in its broad outline, is completely dominant in the Western world, in a sense that even right-wing parties are influenced by leftist ideas. Conservatives and right-wing political parties are spreading leftist ideas, in the sense that I could summarize very briefly: the left is the idea of tolerance, equality, diversity, inclusion, and immigration, basically. And I know that the Jews dominate academia, the media, politics, and finance, and they help spread leftist ideas, but most leftists and most left-leaning conservatives in the West are whites. So this broad political view dominating the West could be summarized by the term cultural Marxism. It's very unsatisfactory to summarize such a complex unfolding of ideas which are sometimes contradictory, but if I had to simplify to the utmost, I would say that the West is dominated by cultural Marxism, basically. And there is a process of opposition to the left, what I call in my videos the phenomenology of the European spirit, namely various stages. Populist movements are vaguely opposed to what they call the system. It's very vague, indeterminate, it's not very precise, not very clear, but there are populist movements. The Brexit, Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, Bolsonaro even, and populist tendencies with Marine Le Pen. So these populists, if you look at their program, they are not right-wingers, but they are more right-wing than the current leftist establishment. Then you have conservatives who are opposing the Democrats or the leftists. They are more strong-minded, they have a clearer view, but they do not dare talk about the race question. They talk about values, about the family, about paying less taxes, about free speech or the right to own guns, about defending our culture, but it's very vague. And in league with the conservatives, there are the patriots, and so there's a movement of opposition between globalism, which is embodied by the left, and the patriots who wants to retreat within their own national borders. But then there's a distinction between patriots and nationalists. Should we include the non-whites members who have adopted Western standards of living within our new brand of patriotism or nationalism? Should we base a national consciousness upon values or upon ethnicities? These are the kind of problems and questions which shake the Western world. So there is this tendency. And then we have the far right, which is at the fringe now, but there exists a far right revival in the West, radical, racist right. And this threat of the far right, what I call the specter or the phantom or the ghost of Adolf Hitler, is what structures the entire political spectrum and the entire economic and social and moral life of the West. So, yeah, that's what I could say. And then in the realm of spirituality, I will talk only of what I know, namely the West. If I had to summarize very briefly, I would say that in the West, the dominant form of spirituality is what I call atheistic Christianity, namely what I've just mentioned in the previous part. All these leftist values, the idea of tolerance, equality, diversity, inclusion, welcoming refugees and immigrants, it's political Christianity. So the people who are leftist, whether they believe or not in Christianity, whether they identify or not as Christians, they behave as Christians in their everyday life, in their political endeavor. Then there are the Christians who believe in Christianity in the West, the traditionalists, so to speak. It's stronger in the United States and the Anglo-Saxon countries than in Europe, but there still remains old-fashioned Christians, one might say. Then there's the development of a new age type of spirituality, talking about spirits awakening to a higher consciousness, the problem of the ego and the self and a higher self and these kind of stuff. There's the Buddhist Eastern brand of spirituality in the West. I'm talking people who are attracted by Buddhism, the idea of the void, of meditation and accessing a higher consciousness and stuff like that. So it's kind of mixed with the New Age, various Eastern influences. It's not very determinate, but people are attracted, although they define themselves as atheists and they reject the traditional religions, especially Christianity, they are nonetheless spiritual. They would define themselves not as religious, but as spiritual people. And then the question is, what's the difference between religion and spirituality? That's very complex question. Then there are the atheists, those who are rationalist atheists. They do not believe in spirituality or in God, but they have thought about the question, and they have their reasons. They are cosmological, Darwinian, Marxist, or Nietzschean, or Darwinian, or they are people who do not believe in any transcendence, but they have their reasons, and they have thought about the problem, and they have rational arguments to justify their lack of faith. So this is one of the fundamental features of Western civilization, that many people are atheists. And we have militant atheists like Dawkins and Dennett and Sam Harris and Lawrence Krauss, and it's a fundamental feature of our day and age. And one cannot understand the 21st century without taking into account these state of mind. And then I know that there is a resurgence, a revival of paganism in the West, namely white Europeans seeking their roots. They seek to reestablish, to recover, to reclaim their cultural, spiritual, and religious roots. And it's quantitatively very limited, but these pagans, and I know myself because I have gone through the path of right-wing pagan spirituality, they are developing a new spirituality, which is a very old spirituality, and they are reconnecting to their divine self. And the pagan community is the most divinely inspired community in the world as of now, because there are right-wing pagans who have made the experience of the divine and of spirituality. And this is a fundamental feature of our day and age, of that which not many people are as of now aware, but yeah. And finally, I will talk about science and philosophy. The fundamental characteristic of our day and age in physics, I would say, is the attempt to unify quantum physics and relativity, and to find the theory of the one unified theory, what some call the theory of everything. So we are living in an age when physics there's an attempt to unify the whole of physics and to produce a scientific theory of the whole of being. And in the realm of metaphysics, if I had to summarize very briefly, metaphysics died in the West with Hegel, because Hegel achieved metaphysics, and there was nothing else to say after Hegel, because he included every point of view within his system, I guess. Maybe not completely, but we'll see. And there has been vague attempts to revive metaphysics over the past 200 years, but most great philosophers in the Western tradition have been anti-metaphysicians, and they have tried to refute metaphysics or to refute Hegel in one way or another. And the dominant brand of metaphysics that we have in the West is the deconstructionist of the 1960s, Derrida, Foucault, the Frankfurt School, I don't know all their names, but the idea of the deconstructionist, it's still the dominant in the academia brand of philosophies, that today in the West we have no metaphysics. We have no established system of metaphysical knowledge, so that's a fundamental feature of the 21st century, is that the West has lost its metaphysics. And I will conclude. Yeah, so I tried, it's been 30 minutes almost, so I tried to give the broadest view of what could be said about the 21st century in 30 minutes. If I had to make a report to an observer, one might say, I would say this is what I have been able to gather in the broadest outline to say what kind of times are we living in. So yeah, that's what I had to say.